Welcome back to Filter. I'm Diane Mizota, and we're back at the Classic Gaming Expo in Las Vegas, where we're counting down the best classic console games of all time. With 7 down and 3 up, let's catch up before we wrap up with a quick recap. Mega Mania slides into the 10th spot. Enduro crosses the finish line in 9th place. Your Hero finishes in 8th. Adventure unlocks the 7th place finish. The Chicken crossed the road to that freeway to grab the 6th spot. Kabooyah! Kaboom is the bomb at number 5. And it may have been a freebie, but combat has more than enough fight to wind up in 4th. Speaking of fight, here's one that takes place above ground. River Raid puts you in the pilot seat of a B-1 Strato Wing assault jet, sends you into the heat of combat over the hazardous river of no return. Perhaps it wasn't the most original game in the world, but it was a hell of a good time. Plus, it was developed by a woman, so hell yeah. The Atari air shooter comes in 3rd.
River Raid is the granddaddy of all like shooter games. This is a Carol Shaw game. She was one of the first female programmers to actually write a game that made it very, very big.
River Raid is your raid you're pulling all the way down the river, where you're climbing up this snaking river and you are facing, flak and various challenges. Things are jumping up to get you, and you've got to be shooting or bombing things as you're moving along.
With a possibility of running out of fuel. So you have to run the fuel tanks over to gain your fuel to continue.
Pretty basic concept, but there was just enough variety in it to keep it interesting.
It was kind of a simple game, blowing up bridges with your plane.
River Raid knocks itself a spot in the countdown, but the games you're about to see weren't as lucky. Here's a look at a few titles that got filtered out.
Flag capture. Field of squares, one of which has a flag. Okay. The goal is to be the first one to get to the flag. But this was something where you're competing with another person, but the goal is not just to get them, the goal is to use your environment and read the signals and do all that. There was more to it.
I would add Frostbite to that list. Frostbite is another game that kept you on your toes, where you jumped across floating icebergs, avoiding crabs, and collecting fish to gain your points. Your object was to build an igloo and then hide in the igloo from the attacking bear. I would have to say, if I were to add a game to that list, I would add Night Stalker from the Intellivision platform. It's a game where you roam around a maze, trying to avoid initially bats and robots who get much faster and much more vicious, and it finally gets to the point where they can shoot through the walls at you. So it's a very addictive, very entertaining game. I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't played it yet, and that's Night Stalker.
Now that we've paid our respects to a few veterans that got overlooked, let's pay the props to the best-looking vet on the block. Your 2 favorite classic console games are Yars' Revenge and Pitfall, and that's no surprise. Yars' Revenge was a super original shooter which had Atari fans jamming that little red fire button for days on end, while Pitfall kept you going and going until you finally reached the end. It's considered to be the first real platforming game ever. But only one of these games can be best classic console game ever. And you know what that means. It's time to sit down and strap in. The shooter takes on Swinger and another filter face-off.
Yars' Revenge is a space action game with a whole science fiction story upon which it was predicated that I heard the programmer wrote himself, actually.
Yars' Revenge versus Pitfall. Yars' Revenge. Both of them are spectacular games. Please don't get me wrong. I think it's just from a personal perspective, I enjoy Yars' Revenge more than I do Pitfall.
I would probably pick Yars' Revenge because I'm really into shooting games, and Yars' Revenge has got a lot more action than Pitfall does.
I would go with Yar's Revenge because Pitfall has a definite ending, and if you're really good, you can play Yar's Revenge forever. I mean, if that's your thing.
Oh man, I've got to go with Pitfall on that one. Slightly better crafted, more innovative graphics at the time. You know, a lot more things on the screen. It wasn't just black and a few things on the screen you're shooting at.
For me personally, I like Pitfall. I like the role-playing games better than the action shooters, so I'd choose Pitfall.
I would say it was a pretty good adventure game. You have to gather 32 treasures and to accumulate 114,000 points in that 20-minute time frame.
I would pick Pitfall in a face-off because Pitfall Harry is just this really cool, enduring console character. Very simple guy. The whole like sound effect of people swinging where you go.
It took about 10 minutes to design the game of Pitfall on a piece of paper. It then took 1,000 hours sitting on a computer to bring it to life.
The polls are closed, your votes are counted, and your choice for the best classic console game of all time is Pitfall! Harry hangs his hat on the top spot. Well, that wraps up this episode of Filter. Remember, the opinions expressed on this show are yours, not mine. You can make your vote count on future episodes by logging on to the Filter show page at g4tv.com/filter. Until then, I'm Diane Mizoda, and I'll see you next time.